Welcome to Critical Faculty. Today, we are going to have another conversation about um, uh, the promises of God to different nations throughout the ages. Is it just the Abrahamic religions or God of the Abrahamic religions who've come up with the idea, or whether the idea is actually quite old and it's been copied and borrowed from other gods and other civilization? I've got just the one with, I think, with the right perspective, and I'm going to tell you in a second why while I'm talking to my good friend Derek Lambert. Hello, Derek. How's it going?
What's up, Hanny?
Uh, I'm very, very excited about your perspective because I was thinking about it the other day. I was thinking, usually you bring a scholar, and as a scholar would be very, very sort of deep into a particular branch of the subject. But God, you have been sitting in front of so many different perspectives, and you being like a sponge, I'm sure you've absorbed so much and listened and watched different perspectives and interpretations of this. And I think your perspective is going to be such a wonderful one. You've seen a lot over the last few years.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I love this stuff, and I'm always trying to learn more. And I know that I know very little. The more you come to know about antiquity and learn, the more you should always keep your mind even more open to learning more. That doesn't mean you don't know. It's that kind of Socratic thing, like, I know enough to know I don't know much. But someone who doesn't know much acts like they know so much. And so it's really important to know how much we don't know. But based on clues, evidence we have, it's worth evaluating and using what I would call heuristic approaches to compare, analyze, and see if there's anything common motifs well known in antiquity that might stretch beyond the Levant, but also within the Levant regions, Arabia, all the way the place we call Israel, Palestine today, the whole nine. These ideas of promises and gods and such go way, way back. And I suspect there's probably stuff that goes rooted even pre-biblical pertaining to Ugaritic, things like that, with the god El and Asherat, or Athirat is how they pronounced her name at that time. So there's a lot. It's really fun to learn.
This is fantastic. We're really starting getting some super chats and some questions, but what I would be asking, and that's wonderful. Thank you very much. We are going to have a conversation. I'd like you to get involved. If the question is quite relevant to the topic, I'm going to display it because it might benefit the flow of the conversation. If it's an extracurriculum type of question, I'm going to leave it to the end. Rest assured, it's going to be displayed and it's going to be answered towards the end. So the conversation is going to be about the conversation between different nations and their gods and the alleged privileges, whether it's a piece of land, whether it's a certain might or a promise of a kingdom to come. All these things we're going to display, and we will be asking whether who authored these things. Are they really authored by God? And we're going to explain why the God of all the peoples in the universe shouldn't be taking sides, especially from the word go. And talking about taking sides, what do you think about God for some reason
Choosing a certain
choosing?
group
Yeah,
instead of anyone else. Well, look, we got to back up, right, Henny? We got to back up because, I mean, I'd love to just throw out what I think, right? And that might be the best thing to do because it's like someone who might hear what I say might walk away and go, hold on, I don't believe that. So they have a belief system. And so what I'm going to say is going to be contrary to your belief system, probably, if you are a believer. If you're someone like me who's more interested in kind of the Scooby-Doo method, look for the ghost, which is really the human behind that figure. You guys think it's a demon, you think it's a ghost. Come to find out, you unmask it. It's Mr. Bob down the street who's trying to just spook you because he's tired of you guys running through his cornfield, using an example. I don't know why I came up with that. But the point is, it's like there's always a thumbprint and a human hand involved. And so using that historical methodology, which is natural, using a naturalist perspective, what I would say is it's very telling that a God chooses a certain identity of a group, whether it be a tribe, a nation, a group of people, whatever. And isn't it interesting? It's your group that your God chose. What I mean to say is the perspective that we're seeing written from the scribe, whoever the pinned author is, usually anonymous, that is saying the God chose them or saying the God did this, is usually one who benefits or is the participant of that group in which they're trying to explain. Or they're using an idea, constructing a narrative that is pointing toward their group from an ancestor. Like Abraham's from Ur of Chaldees, which is up there in the Mesopotamian region. Why would they do that? These are most likely Judean scribes, because notice where he lands. He lands in the southern region of the Levant when he dies, and where he picks up, where he really starts to plant his life. Where he's from, some scholars think this is evidence of saying, hey, Babylonians, hey, Assyrians, hey, Persians, check it out. Our ancestor, he comes from this region. We're technically family with you. However, Judean scribes are probably the ones penning the story using northern traditions. When I say northern, I mean Israel before it collapsed due to Assyrian conquest. Jacob, the story of Jacob and the ideas of Jacob as the father of the northern kingdom, he gets implemented into the southern traditions, and they try to make those traditions really theirs. They adopt a far more important empire, the northern kingdom. They take their stories and really just make it all southern. So it's really the southern Judeans who do this. So this God promises land, a temple, all of these things in this region, and it just so happens to benefit the very people who pen the story. So these ideas are the humans painted onto the deity. It's more complicated than what I'm saying here, because humans are weird. And what I mean by is, even when I was a believer, Hanny, I would do something would happen, whether it was in my favor or not. If it was in my favor, I would say that God fulfilled something, and it was just me doing the thing. But because I got to get home on time. Oh, notice I went through 4 stoplights and every one of them were green. Coincidence? I think not. God is showing me favor. Notice how normal things become coincidentally explained as God fulfilling them. I found my car keys. Yes, the Lord blessed me to find my car keys. Sometimes it happens after the fact. You're looking back, you recreate a memory because our brains do that, or something really did happen in your favor, and you just so happen to craft the narrative and say, God promised, and wouldn't you know, it happened, but you're writing it after things occurred. So they call that ex eventu. There's a lot of detail here to get into. I just think people who are looking at this, I'm looking at it from a human perspective, and I would do the same thing to any other claims of any other religion in the world and draw these similar conclusions.
So I'm going to just, this is a sort of a relevant question, and will lead us into this conversation, because I want to understand the background and the roots of why a super deity, why the God of the universe should not be taking sides. And we can see it from the very, very beginning, the very humble story of Cain and Abel. Mm-hmm. You know, we know God is not a vegan by the looks of things, because he preferred the slaughtered animal. He prefers the blood and the barbecue. But from the word go, he causes rifts, because the two sons, provided the best of what they can afford.
Actually, according to Francesca, I just read her book again. Sorry, I'm interrupting, just to correct something.
No, sure.
I thought this too, and I was like, they both brought their best, but one brought vegetables, and God's not a vegetarian. He's a meat eater. She said, no. It's because Cain did not bring his best. So in the context, Abel brings his best offering, burnt offering, the best barbecue, really. We like to think of it in such religious terms that we imagine that this is just, I don't know, some ritual that is only a religious one in our minds, and not realizing, yes, it's that, but it's actually a meal for the God. The God has to eat, and you're feeding God, and that is the kind of deal. In fact, it's a contract that Noah, this goes back, Hanny. This goes back to Mesopotamian, Inky, Enlil, the whole nine. When they flooded humanity and they said, we're sick of you noisy rodents on earth, you're annoying us. I mean, yeah, we created you to work for us so that the lesser gods don't have to do it, but y'all won't shut up. Enlil hates humans. He sends the flood. However, Inky, talking to a wall, depending on which myth you're looking at, he gets the message to Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim and his wife survive in an ark with animals, just like Noah.
Mhm.
And at the end, Utnapishtim just sets up an altar and gives a burnt offering. Next thing you know, the smell, it rose like a fresh incense to heaven, as they always kind of describe it in the Bible. And Enlil's heart was changed. And if you turn to Genesis 6-9 and you read the Noah account, as soon as God kills all humanity except Noah and his family on the ark, he takes one of these ark animals. Noah slaughters the ark, creating a burnt offering. And it says that the aroma went into the nostrils of God. Sounds pretty corporeal.
Mhm.
And then God goes, I shouldn't have done this to humanity. Like he had a change of heart, like a normal human would, not a ultimate, he's impeccable and this is anthropomorphic language. And shut up. That's so anachronistic. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're bringing in philosophy that has nothing to do with this original material.
Mhm.
And so when you're looking at it, you go, this God's heart changed and he felt bad that he killed humans because damn, that barbecue is good. Who's going to cook that barbecue for me? Man, I'll never do it again. Here's my rainbow in the sky. Sorry, I gave you that little rundown there, Hanny. Anyway.
No, that's all right, but that's sort of the point still remains. You know, you think, why would God? I mean, you got I think a farmer and a shepherd anyway. I mean, and everybody is, but for some reason, God is attracted to the barbecue. Yeah, and he might be sort of psychoanalyzing it later on and say, well, this guy's actually provided his best because it's actually more delicious. That's God's perception. But to the farmer, if I'm a farmer and this is the only thing I know about life, or I like vegetables, I'm thinking I'm offering the best of my. If this is a Hindu god, he would have preferred the vegetables, for example. You know, and the story would have been reversed, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know enough about Hinduism yet, and I imagine that when we talk about promises of land and things, I can't pretend that there's not something in the Hindu mythologies. I'm pretty sure there's going to be gods promising lands and territories and stuff. We see it in the Greek myths, and we'll bring one of those up to give you an example of one of them.
So to address this question here, why would a wise God, an all-wise being, starts from the point of view of these are my creations, these are the people I've created, but for some strange reason, and I'm not going to tell people why, I will choose this person over this person, or I'll choose this group of people over this group of people, and then not just keep it to myself, announce it, and cause a rift and cause nations to kill each other.
Okay, so so that I'm painting the picture the way you're describing that properly, why choose Israel according to the biblical text, or the children of Israel, meaning southern, northern tribes, because they want to act like there's a united monarchy or a united kingdom here, as Constellation Pegasus is pointing out. Why choose that? Those people causing a rift for the rest of humanity. There's so many things you said, though. All wise? I mean, are we using later philosophy of saying, oh, omniscient, all-knowing, all-powerful? Then I think that's rubbish. It's absurd to think this God knows everything. He's asking Adam, where are you? He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know a lot of things. And he also changes his mind a lot. And unless you want to say that, well, actually God's being deceptive, pretending he doesn't know, well, then what do we believe, right? How are we going to know what's true here? So I'm looking at this as a human document. And again, I think it's pointing out, here's our tradition. The Judeans down south, which were insignificant, nobody kingdom compared to the north, 10 times the size in the north. Adopting northern traditions, probably also adopting ideas, not probably, but guaranteed adopting ideas in the known world, brushing shoulders with other societies. But the idea that they're dividing and splitting, I feel like that's more of a painted perception from the Bible. We have all these tribes that we're going, the Amalekites, there's this and that. And I wonder if we're looking for history, some of these tribal groups that we hear in Deuteronomy, we hear in Exodus that they're encountering, Amalekites, the Ishmaelites, the Nistalites, the da 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 da. I wonder if a lot of that's fictive, but I also wonder if there's contemporaneous stuff happening that they're saying it goes back. Kind of like Finkelstein with his archaeology will say, hey, some of these sites have zero human activity till the 7th century BCE, meaning nothing before. There's not a layer at all showing human involvement in this area till 700 BCE. The Bible says it happened 1500 BCE. That can't be true. Is this evidence that a scribe 700 or later, most likely later, sometime in the 400s, writes about things that happened in the 700s, but backdates it to a time in which the Bible wants to pretend archaic this happened in these places? I don't know. It's complicated.
Which will explain prophecies and things like that, because if you write something, then prophecies are explained away by the sheer fact that it's not just even after the event, maybe after the folklore, because let's say these might have been lovely stories to tell people around, dinner times, and became folklore and legends, like most nations would do, and then became a holy text. So, and I'm going to ask you this question here: with the number of scholars you've interviewed, do you find that Jewish scholars, when they try to explain the Torah away and the Tanakh and the Hebrew Bible, do you find them that they have a more direct understanding of God? There isn't any sort of an ulterior meanings and stuff like that. But when Christians come to explain away the Old Testament, do you see it almost from a Christian Jesus point of view, where nothing ever as it seems?
So when you said Jewish scholars, that's a complicated. Let me break that down. I want to get your answer on this. If you mean scholars who are Jewish that just so happen to be Jewish, that's a different question from saying a Jewish rabbi or religious Jewish person who might be Orthodox or something. And by the way, there's several categories. There are atheist Jews that are religiously atheists, like Dr. Justin Sledge. He's religious. He's a Jew by practice of religion. He's an atheist. He doesn't believe in a God. And he also is very evidence-based in his research, and he'll call it like he sees it. That God was a storm deity, just like Baal, who evolved into the cosmic creator of the universe by philosophizing him down through the Greek period, or probably post-Persian or whatever. But if you're saying someone like my good friend Rabbi Tovia Singer, who might come on, he might paint a different perspective, but it would be from a Jewish standpoint. And maybe he has anachronisms, not maybe, I'm certain there are anachronisms found in the Talmud, the Mishnah, and in some of the rabbinic traditions that later try to interpret some of the old ancient stuff. They do that too, that you might see Christians do. Christianity as we know it is I'm talking about Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholicism, any evangelical Protestantism and such. It has been so affected by philosophy, by the Platonic, Stoic, Aristotelian philosophers of the time. They have been so tainted with it that they have come up with interpretive methods. Anything goes. It's kind of my problem with Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson has like this really strict moral absolutism, and he's like, there's absolute moral reality and stuff, and there's this and this and this. Then you ask him, hey man, did Jesus rise from the dead? Do you believe he rose from the dead? We all know what I'm saying. None of us need me to interpret, do you think Jesus physically rose from the dead? We all know what that means. And then he goes, that would take me 40 hours to explain. Bro, it's really simple. You do or you don't. And if you can explain why you do or don't, but it's not that complicated. And he philosophizes. First of all, dead. What does dead mean? And what does rise mean? And it was not ever intended to be understood or even implied this way. And so I don't know why I went on down that rabbit trail to just say, I think that you're going to get a Jewish angle from a religious Jew who has a particular perspective and might even allow God to be corporeal. Because in some of the Jewish traditions, God has a hand, God has a nose, God has attributes that are physical and they're like humans, but much bigger. And we see this biblically, but even some of the Jewish traditions stamp that down. And Christianity certainly stamps that down as they get more ascetic. They get more against the flesh because of the philosophies. God absolutely cannot have flesh. Even if you like read the book by Francesca, she goes into a section about poop. I know it doesn't sound important to us. We're like, what the hell? Why would you talk about that? The worshipers in Qumran, when they defecated, they did not ever poop on the Shabbat. It was against Torah to defecate on the holy day, the rest day. But also when it wasn't Shabbat and they went to poop, they would bring white cloth and cover their behinds so that God did not see their back parts while they took a dump. And so this is how serious they were about God seeing them and things. It's interesting.
So I guess curries weren't very popular on Saturdays then.
Yeah, let's wait till we're done with Shabbat before you give me that spicy food, my friend. You know?
So the sophisticated image of God, how conveniently it's sort of aligned with the sophistication of the human mind. Because with the Christian analogy, we're talking about Homerus and the Greek tragedy and the sophistication of the human literature, and suddenly God has become as complex as the human mind at that point. How
Even
convenient.
more, they try to make it more so, but yes, everything the human is, God is much more. If you feel pain, he feels even more. If you can get angry, his anger will definitely outshine your anger. He can cause the lightning to strike and the mountains to melt and the earth to quake. Obviously, they took natural phenomena often and they made them attributes or even aspects of God's anger or divine love, depending on whatever it might have been. Because when you get further and further back, you'll find an agricultural cycle. And the remnants of that fossil, of what we call agricultural, it's a cyclical idea of nature repeating itself, and that God is repeating itself of these ideas. You find it with, if you go far enough back, you'll find it with the goddess Inanna. And when Inanna sheds her clothing to go down into the underworld, she doesn't realize what she's getting herself into, according to the myth. She goes into the underworld and literally becomes meat on a hook at the end, dead, just a corpse, but then comes back and realizes she can't leave the underworld and not have someone replace the goddess. And so she goes back and finds her lover, Dumuzi, who's not crying. He doesn't weep for her. He's not mourning her death. She's pissed. Are you kidding me? Dumuzi's spending half the year in the underworld on my behalf. And so you find this cyclical stuff. It's really interesting to see how humans have derived religion from natural phenomena, and we're pattern-seeking creatures. And so we've created the best we could at the time, as far as that society goes, on trying to make sense of the world around us. In fact, if you and me were in the middle of, let's say we're in ancient Greece, before the civilization became what it is, and we noticed that each spring, green, fertility, birds and the bees, they knew this. They knew that there was sex happening, lots of it at this time of the year. And this is why we see the livestock, the plants growing and stuff. They would look and notice, as they observe the stars too, certain planetary bodies that are gods in their perspective were the ones who had the power to bring the life to Earth. Venus may be the god at the time, or goddess, and bringing life to the plants, right? Depending on which culture you're looking at. They connect the dot that each year at this time, this star is here. Well, that's the star that caused the green on Earth. Well, there's no correlation between a star appearing at a certain in reality, in science, right? It's in our head. We connect those dots. And I think religion is very much, what is it called? The hypersensitive, there's like a detective system where we overthink, we over connect things that aren't really there. I know
Oh, that's the pareidolia hyperactive agency detection, is it?
right. That's what I was getting at. And I think that the religions and the cause of natural phenomena are like the implications of that. Like you have storm deities. Well, how the hell did that tornado come? It must have been a god. It's way more powerful than humans. We didn't do it, so it must be gods. And so they assumed agency behind things. They had no way to connect those dots. And they did the same thing with natural phenomena left and right all throughout antiquity.
Derek, we're going to take a tiny little break. And when we come back, guys, we are going to be showcasing one of the most wonderful channels I've come across on YouTube.
Thank you.
Derek, a few months ago, we sat together and I talked to you about you reaching the 100,000 subscribers and getting that shield. I think you were around 70, and God, this has bloated. I mean, my goodness, you are closing on the 200,000 subscribers, and I urge everybody here, whether you've never seen Derek before, you've never seen his work, to go and have a look at the description of the video here. The link of his channel is attached, and the amount of information is astounding. I think this is by far the best scholarly and professionally run YouTube channel that addresses the biblical scholarship. This is wonderful work, Derek. You ought to be very, very proud.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Hanny, and I love doing this, and I love being part of the community of people who are also trying to figure out and have answers, and all of the cool things we've been doing.
That's wonderful. So what about the other way around? So when we're talking about the Israelites, let's focus on them a little bit, because a lot of things happen to these people, because with all the good things that have been promised by God, it seems that when they have a blight of some reason, or they're like lost in the desert for 40 years, or for very strange reason, again, that is some sort of a punishment or a curse, or because they have swayed from the way, from the path, and they get treated by God, but they're still contained. It's almost like you're punishing your little son because they've done something wrong. You still love them very much, and you still gonna take them back and give them really large presents, but you want them to learn from a certain situation, a certain thing they've done.
That's all throughout the Bible. I just did a really fantastic interview on why the Bible began with a scholar, Dr. Jacob L. Wright, and he thinks that the Bible as a product that we see, and it's pretty, I mean, this is a bit anachronistic because the canon of the Bible is not till later, but there is this holy literature being written by these people, Judeans from the South, who are writing he suggests, post defeat. They have been completely defeated. They got conquered in Assyria. They got conquered in Babylon. They're going back to rebuild the temple with the Messiah Cyrus, King Cyrus from Persia. And if you read the actual counts from the Cyrus inscriptions, this means Cyrus himself says who was the god that helped him to accomplish defeating the Babylonians. He says it was Marduk. But some anonymous author of the Bible has to just outdo that and say, actually, it was Yahweh who did this. And you know what I mean? Like, so Yahweh had to be the one. Anyway, that's a side note. The point is, post-defeat, they're living with a trauma. And they have to explain, why did Yahweh fail us? There's some Jews during this period, and I'm going to just use the term Jew. That's anachronistic probably at the time too, because they're probably Judeans. They're from the region. The concept and the family idea of Jew that develops probably over time, especially post Maccabees and Hasmonean dynasty and stuff, when Judaism, as Jonathan Adler, the archaeologist, talks about, has not actually become a nation religion that is being practiced wide. If there is anything biblical, it's by certain sporadic scribes who probably have very little, if not no interest, or not interest, but no influence on the totality of society at all. Like, they're just people who are pinning stuff. If there's anything floating around with us. The point is every time something doesn't go their way, and then this last time, God promises them the land, God promises them success, God promises this, and then Babylon happens, which was the most cataclysmic, oh my gosh, our temple of Yahweh is destroyed. And they talk about it being like the end of everything. This is their everything. God did not defend or defeat the enemies. And in antiquity, that's a sign that your God is weaker, that your God is not stronger, that your God, like, there's all sorts of things to say that pretty much my God got his ass kicked, to be very frank. That is what many assumed. So what ends up happening is, while you're holding on to this tradition, there's a rationalization, especially once Persia has the elites who are writing these documents, these stories that we're reading. These elites come back and they act like all of the Judeans come back. Really, there wasn't that many Judeans who had left. The elites may have been in Babylon, but no, it was a very small group of scribal priests, probably, who go back to Jerusalem to build and rebuild the temple. That's where you see this kind of strife between Samaritans, and they say, no, these were people who were planted in the land. All this drama that goes on between identification of which group is who. I'm making a long story here, and it could be just shorter. I just want to give you details for the viewer. The point is, they rationalize that actually God didn't get beat. He left us because we sinned, and he is not going to stand in the presence. This was punishment for us being bad. And that rationalization continues to live on. And many Jews, even going way fast forward here to World War II, many Jews who experienced what happened in Nazi Germany, and I've talked to many Jewish scholars and Jews themselves, a lot of them went, we don't think this had anything to do with us not keeping Torah, not doing. A lot of them have realized, hey, all right, this is not God. And a lot of people have left. A lot of Jewish people stopped believing that this whole story about God is true. Even if they practiced the religion, the tradition, they stopped actually believing Yahweh was behind what's happening to them on earth, and they stopped believing altogether. So it just depends on the Jew. But the story we have is, we messed up. Yahweh didn't get beat. Our God is the one God. We messed up. He punished us by leaving the temple, and that's why it got destroyed. And then they go, well, where did he go? Well, he could ride on the wings of the cherub. So they rationalize that he was able to leave and go wherever he wants and then come back. That's how they made sense of it. Whereas most other people, I would imagine, would just adopt the other gods, and I'm sure many Jews did at the time, and I'm using that term anachronistically, but many of the people conquered in Jerusalem were probably adopting the Babylonian gods, were probably adapting the Persian, Zoroastrianism, the whole nine. And of course, we know that there's influence from these societies on biblical scribes. But it's a fun, fascinating thing to think about. Instead of blaming the outside world, a lot of societies would blame others. They internalize the guilt onto themselves. So this is something that Jewish people have done throughout history often, is they put the blame on their own people in many cases. We did wrong. We sinned against Yahweh, and we need to repent. We need to get right and turn back to God, et cetera, et cetera. And he'll make his face to shine upon us, as the famous quote would have it.
So this the statement here by Constellation Pegasus is take it more as a comment. I think is going to lead us to a very interesting analogy. The God's chosen people analogy. We said it doesn't make sense in the sense that there is one creator, and his people, all his people are his people. We should be all his sons. However, wouldn't the chosen people analogy make more sense in a truly polytheistic realm where Yahweh is not the God, but one of the gods, and not even a big one. I think it was. I'm not sure if you've seen the statues, but he looks quite anemic with a funny little hat. Uh, some of the statues they found for Yahweh, he looks quite like a cartoonish character from Family Guy or something, and then it's well understood, because if there are multiple deities sort of having conflicts among themselves, his brother Baal and the big cheese El and all of that, and
Right.
then he wants to adopt a certain people, because you become maybe a better god when you have a people, sort of a nation to care for, and that nation call upon you in battles and wars to win you the war. Uh, then God's chosen people here would make complete sense, because we're talking about different gods adopting different nations and their
Mhm.
conflicts, and these gods almost fighting among themselves through the people they care for.
So what is your question?
So wouldn't that sort of God's chosen people make sense more in a polytheistic realm where there isn't just one God, like more of a competing gods?
Well, that's biblical. There are several gods. Even if later scribes try to start to politically, I would say they had motivation to get rid of other Yahweh worshiping centers, let alone other gods. I mean, they literally had the same God and several temples for that same God in different locations. So they weren't just trying to like downplay other gods. And they did a fine job over time doing that by demoting them from gods to angels, demoting them to like lesser beings who have powers, but they're not gods or whatever over time. Even today, if you ask, many Christians who aren't well educated, hey, are there more than one God? Like, no, there's only one God. And you'd be like, what are angels? Well, they're divine creatures created by God. And then you're like, oh, okay, so where did that idea come from? And you start going back, you realize it's actually polytheism that gets repackaged in a demoting situation with a hierarchy with an ultimate creator at top. But they are also competing against other Yahweh camps, other Yahwists that have different temples. So the scribes are trying to centralize it at Jerusalem and make that the place. In the text, historically, that's a different story. History in these texts do not line up. And I'm talking about history connected to archaeology and the facts outside of this. We can go to Elephantine papyri and find this as well. So in Elephantine, which is an island down there in the region where Egypt is, Elephantine, Egypt, you find a group of Judeans or a group of Yahwist worshiping people whose temple got destroyed by the Egyptians. And they're writing to the priest in Jerusalem saying, hey, y'all, we got a problem. Our temple to Yahweh and his wife, Asherah, just got destroyed. And the Jerusalem priest send them goods, funds to help them rebuild a temple to Yahweh and his wife Asherah in the 5th to 4th centuries BCE. So how did the Judean, like here they are in Jerusalem, they're the central hub, and they're sending funds to help support Yahweh and his wife's temple in a whole different location. And scholars scratch their heads, and some want to say, well, that's an argument from silence to try and make much out of that. And then others want to say, actually, this is screaming extremely loud to us that the people in Jerusalem didn't have Deuteronomy, or they didn't even consider this scripture. It wasn't on their radar. They had no clue about not having other Yahwist centers. So maybe this happens after that, and there's this huge, let's stop all the different Yahwehs and this and that. Christianity goes through another political change, right? There's several versions of Christianity. Then eventually you have these guys like Irenaeus and stuff trying to stamp down on ideas they think are wrong and try to centralize it into one kind of idea. Eventually they stamp out the Trinity, deciding what that means. And then you have these creeds that come over time. The same kind of idea in a way happens with Jewish people in how they formulate their religion. So it's a fascinating thing to think about. And there's plenty of passages in the Bible that show several divine figures, the Godhead in Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image, or even going all the way to Genesis 11, where you see the Tower of Babel, and he says, let us go down and confound their language or confuse them, changing their tongues, etc. There's a plurality of deities. Deuteronomy 32 also talks about El-Yon and the 70 sons of El that are given a nation. Here we are talking about land and gods being for particular regions. And the gods are not just connected to the land at this time, they're connected to the people's blood in many cases. Paula Fredrickson has an amazing speech. If anyone like a lecture online, look up the God's God is in the blood or something like that. And so these tribes believed their gods were connected to them. Most of them had ancestral connections to their God. And there's a strange phenomena we find in the Bible. You find all of these other cultures that claim that they, way back, somewhere way back, the God birthed children that eventually became us, right? Like we're connected genealogically to the God. Where's that in the Bible? Where is El or Yahweh and his bloodline? We have fragments and hints throughout the Bible where he talks about, you are my children. You are my offspring. He uses direct genealogical language that literally means these things. And if you use that same language and see it all in the other cultures, those people are connected to those gods in a real biological way, they claim, right? So it made me ask the question to people like Dan McClellan. Hey, Dan, when you did your PhD dissertation, have you ever considered that Yahweh, and this is going to sound funny, but we're doing kind of what Euhemerus did. He was a Greek philosopher who said that at one point in antiquity, maybe some of these figures like Heracles, Zeus were real humans, and they got deified by their followers or their people around, and they made them into these unbelievable gods, right? To make it simplified for the viewer. And I said, what if Yahweh was some dude out here in the middle of the desert? He was like a leader of a tribe. They fought another tribe and he kicked so much ass that they were like, this is the guy. He's the warrior. God is a man of war, one of the Bible passages says, right? God is a man of war. And I thought, what if God, Yahweh, was a human who got deified? And then they end up having like standing stones and they had like all of these representations about him. And they had
reminds me of the song, What If God Was One of Us?
Right? Seriously, though, it's so funny. I had a good conversation with my buddy, my brother-in-law, actually, Juan. And I said, hey, Juan, imagine you were just so cool. Everybody around you thought, man, Juan's the man. Century goes by and there's a cult that develops around Juan. 500 to 1,000 years goes by, or 1,500 years goes by, and next thing you know, you're the cosmic creator of the freaking universe, dude. Like nobody knows you as the human on Earth. They only know you as the guy who created all things, and you live outside space and time and all that nonsense. That's what I wondered, if Yahweh was a human like that eventually evolves, not only into a storm deity, but then the cosmic creator. And my brother-in-law laughed. He's like, oh my God, bro, what? But Dan McClellan said he presented and mentioned this in his dissertation to his committee. And they looked at him like, you're crazy. Don't push us too far. But he says, I wouldn't be shocked if Yahweh was a human who got deified and turned into a god.
Oh, we've seen it over and over again, and actually explains away why the Judaism, as supposed to be a universal religion, it's not. You don't evangelize, and it's connected to the bloodline of the mother. It makes complete sense when you put it in that context. We're talking about a religion that you cannot just enter. You cannot just enter you can, but you will never be accepted as a person who was born Jew.
Right. That process. Well, depending on the time and the place and who the rabbi is and what the Jews thought in that region at the time, how you became a family member differs. It just depends. Some Jews thought you could never just become, and then some thought you just convert, especially when you get later into like times like Paul's time. When you're talking about Paul is influenced by Rome. There's no doubt about it. His ideas of adoption. There's a book, Cattell Berthelot, I always pull it down, called Jews and the Roman Rivals. And this is before Rome turned Christian. Rome had laws, which the Jews at the time, post Maccabees, post Hasmonean, they had believed in themselves as a nation who had laws. Even if they didn't have their own like independent sovereignty and stuff, at times they did when they fought and battled it out with the Maccabees and stuff, but they believed they had laws, and they kind of saw their ancient religion in a way competitive with surrounding Roman, Greek ideas. You see this with people like Philo of Alexandria, Aristobulus, a 2nd century BCE Jewish philosopher and writer. You see this with Josephus. They're competing with other scribes that are arguing against them. And one of the debates at the time was, did Moses borrow from Plato or Plato borrow from Moses? It's just interesting stuff to consider. And like, why did they have this? Did our guy come first or did your guy? Because one of them borrowed from one of them. And the idea that won the day was that Plato borrowed from Moses by most people. And the reason is your story about Moses takes place 1300 BCE. Plato, we know, is a 4th century BCE philosopher. How do you explain that 800 years before Plato, Moses' story, I put in quotes because I say this needs to be reevaluated and reconsidered by scholarship. I did a video on this where I wonder if the whole notion of Moses' story was crafted post 4th century.
Yeah.
I'm not making this up. Like, you can go to Manetho, you can go and check out some of these authors. First author who ever mentions Moses was not Jewish and was not even Egyptian. We're dealing with a Greek author. And of course, Manetho and a Greek author were the first two guys to ever mention and write that we have historical documentation from about Moses. And the stories they'd say sound nothing like what we have in our Bibles. So I'm open to the idea that this is like getting its final crafty touch-ups.
Well, as you mentioned, and I apologize because people are saying now that my my audio is lower. It was higher before, and I've lowered it now. Do you hear an echo, Derek? Or
I don't hear an echo.
Okay, fantastic.
I hear Yahweh, but I don't hear an echo. Yeah.
I mean, this is a very interesting story, especially the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Jews, because it was a very particular God. The universality of God, it looks like we're talking about local gods that are attached to lands, attached to certain people, and act locally. Then it becomes universal later on. So the story of Jesus is to bring this God into the fold, into the rest of the world. And suddenly Christianity becomes that sort of universal global religion. But is it?
Right.
Is it truly, or there's something underneath that still makes it still local?
Yeah, no, it's both. That's the problem. It's both. You can find what you want if you look hard enough in the corpus of scripture that they have, and they didn't have a canon yet. This doesn't get nailed till like in the CE, AD era, when you start getting a canon for the Jewish people, like officially nailed down. And I'm not the one who said this. Seth L. Sanders, who's a professor on Hebrew Bible and the origins of Hebrew and all of that, I just texted him today. He wrote me this because I need more material on Enoch. I'm going to be doing some documentaries, really going in on Enoch deeper. The last one was a successful hit. I want to do a deep dive. So what you just said is important, though, because I think, again, back to Cattell Berthelot's work with Jews and their Roman rivals, let me just put it this way, and I'm just having fun. I want to reverse the conversation so that I'm not the only one ranting here. What made Rome so successful?
I think the unification over one religion eventually.
So
the Christianity eventually.
So I personally don't think Christianity made Rome successful. I think it might have even put a damper on Rome. But then again, it was already falling apart due to other things.
It was towards the end. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would personally, so this is what I'm trying to just get the conversation to have you answer me. And I wanted you to kind of make a guess, even if it was wrong, to point out one of the most influential and powerful things about Rome was their law and how they dealt with citizens, how they dealt with people who were not Roman was honestly completely groundbreaking in society at the time. And Greek writers who were writing into the Roman era, where Rome is now dominated and Greece has collapsed, where there's still like little city states and stuff where Greeks are still dwelling. Those authors were saying, you know what? Rome's law of inclusion of citizenship is why Greece failed. We were very xenophobic, which means they're all about their tribe and their people and not other people. We're chosen. You see this idea about Israel, the people of God in the Bible. We're chosen and you're not. And there's condemnation even of other tribes and even annihilate, according to the literature, right? Get rid of, completely eradicate some of these evil others. That's not original or only biblical. So when we want to critique the Bible for this, we also need to look at the Athenians and look at the Greeks and say, you guys did this too. Those damn barbarians, but we're human. We're not animals like them. We're actual humans who are more godlike in our structure, in our society, and our laws. So if you were more good morally and stuff in the Greek world, you were closer to being like a god. In fact, this could be an explanation for why they saw Jesus as divine in many ways. His moral behavior is what painted him to look like a god, because over time, the ethics became something of a divine thing that you needed to follow or act a certain way. In Rome, they included citizens that were even enemies of Rome. They were willing to forgive if you fought against Rome and you changed and said, I will never fight against Rome again. You could technically, the process I'm sure is more technical here, but you could become a Roman citizen, and many in history did. So that's what made them unique and what made them develop and grow. Well, the Greeks noticed this after they're already collapsed and said, wow, this is going to be a successful nation. But the Christians, as well as Jews that start to develop, they saw it. So they also believe themselves to be a nation, even if they're scattered and they're all over, with promises about the land that eventually they're going to get by their God. They want to include more family. They want to have a bigger population. How do you do that? Not everyone, Mr. Rabbi, whoever he may be, not everyone is ready to come snip their pee-pee, go Shabbat, go kosher, and stop eating pig. You know, there's people who are wanting to be part of us but aren't willing to go all the way. God-fearers, for example, we start seeing happening in the New Testament literature, and archaeology backs this up. They're non-Jews who want to come and worship the God of Israel. But then you start to see something else too. People even the Jewish rabbis are reinterpreting the meaning of this, and they're saying, hey, you can turn and become a child of Abraham literally by becoming adopted like that. Just have faith, say the prayer of Deuteronomy 26. I'm probably butchering the number here, but it's the idea that the God of our fathers, Abraham and such, and that you can become a child of Abraham through no genetic connection whatsoever. You can be part of our family. Well, they would become adopted. This is a very Roman concept. So to compete with Rome, you have to adopt some of the ideas that are showing success. And this is exactly what any and every society does. When they see a society succeeding or they have an idea or narrative they like, they'll oftentimes co-opt it or graft that concept into their own story or use it because they're competing against it. But they don't usually shy away completely and have nothing to do with those ideas. They use them in some way, whether it's these are good ideas or they use them to say these are bad ideas. Either way, they have to use them because you can't
Actually,
not use them.
that's a very interesting point because it makes complete sense. God as the lawgiver, It shows a very, very good reciprocal system between a civilization that's trying to control big masses, so you have discipline and laws, and
Right.
people who are naturally attracted to organization of a system that is organized. Even to this date, people trying to migrate to other countries and seek better living standards, they're more attracted to countries where things are run properly, proper laws in place, things under control, and it suits the those who are governing those countries as well, and it becomes more flourishing at that time. So for God to introduce himself, or a religion to introduce itself as a well-disciplined religion that has laws that if people can follow, they will never sway or sort of go astray.
Right.
It's quite attractive to the human beings, right?
It is. And I think monotheism was starting to be attractive regardless of Jewish monotheism. We have Greek monotheism that was actually occurring. And a lot of the philosophers were already starting to craft monotheism as a concept. Plato has that concept, an ultimate good creator that is. There's all these forms, spherical forms through several layers, eventually getting to the ultimate good. And that Aristotelian stuff, you start seeing a lot of these Greek monotheists. And there's even a scholar that Neil, Gnostic informant, brought to my attention that he actually had. Let me get the actual source here. But the guy says that these particular Greek monotheists may have been the God-fearers we see in the New Testament. So we have so much in common, is the idea, with these Jewish monotheists. And here we are, we're already believers in one God. We're Greeks. So we probably believe in the same God. And you start seeing this collaborative effort probably happening. Let me get the name of that. Just scrolling up here because he sent me the book. The name of the book, I kind of want to let you know because this is unique. And this was presented. We talk too much. Me and Neil talk too much. I gotta
And while you're searching for it as well, there's that evolution of the concept, because you start with polytheism, where multiple gods are sort of on equal footing. But there is another term I'm not sure people are familiar with called henotheism, where you have a group of gods, but there is one god ought to be followed or achieve God. It's almost like a natural evolution towards the one God, but not as a one sudden step from polytheism to monotheism. There's like a step in between.
I'm sure there were. There's probably some kind of in between camps and categories, but the book is by Stephen Mitchell, is Leverhulme Professor of Hellenistic Culture at the University of Exeter and a Fellow of the British Academy. His previous books include A History of the Later Roman Empire, 8284 to 641. But he says, in my 1999 study and in a separate article of 1998, I proposed a simple but radical equation that these God-fearers in the New Testament should be identified with the worshippers of Theos Hypsistos. The main reason set out there for identifying the Hypsisterians and the God-fearers are the close similarities between the beliefs and activities of the two groups, as well as their very similar geographical and chronological distribution. Stein claims that the similarities are explicable simply in terms of the same milieu to which the two groups belonged, and that they are insufficiently specific. And that they are insufficiently specific to provide a definition of the same religious groups at different times and places. The first point about the similar milieu concedes most of my arguments. If two very similar religious groups occupy the same milieu, they have. Anyway, he's going into his argument of why this is not absurd to think that these Greek Theos Hypsistos or Hypsisterians are also the God-fearers who are coming and adopting the God of Abraham. And there's some collaborative effort. We know in Hellenistic period that many Jews would even say, hey, there's like this idea that Yahweh is Zeus. And they would, want to hold hands with their Greek or Roman neighbors and say, hey, Jupiter, Zeus, he is Yahweh. And then there are others who are going, no, he's not. And there's these arguments and fights going on. But in the Greek sources about the promised land, I was going to read you the Herodotus thing. Can I share my screen and show that?
Please do. Yeah.
Just to give people something so they know, like, this isn't just a biblical thing. This is something that is far reaching outside of the Bible. And here you have this is Herodotus, the Histories, book 4, chapter 155. There, Polymnestus, a notable Therian, took Phronime and made her his concubine. In time, a son of weak and stammering speech was born to him, to whom he gave the name Battus. And from what I understand, Battus in Greek means stutterer, someone who has a speech issue, which Moses also is said to have had in the Bible. And this connects to Phrixus and all kinds of stuff with the Argonauts and whatnot. But as the Therians and Cyreneans say, but in my opinion, the boy was given some other name. And this is Herodotus making his own opinion, saying that his name was something else, and changed it to Battus on his coming to Libya, taking this new name because of the oracle given to him at Delphi and an honorable office which he received. For the Libyan word for the king is, or for king is Battus. So Libyan, that name means king. But from what I understand, there's other scholars who say the name means stutterer in Greek. And this, I believe, is why the Pythian priestess called him so in her prophecy, using a Libyan name because she knew that he was to be king in Libya. And don't take my word, go check. That could be wrong, that the name means that, but he's a man with speech impediment. So here's a prophecy, right? So he's talking about Pythian priestess called him so in her prophecy, using a Libyan name because she knew that he was to be king in Libya. Notice already there's this idea that she, the prophetess, knows that Battus is going to be king in Libya. He's going to rule a land. For when he grew to adulthood, he went to Delphi to inquire about his voice. And for those who don't know, the oracle at Delphi, this priestess, had direct connection to like Apollo. The god would speak through her, channel his words through the oracle, and she would convey it to the humans. And this is how it was in the Greek world. So he went to Delphi to inquire about his voice, and the priestess in answer gave him this: Battus, you have come for a voice, but Lord Phoebus Apollo sends you to found a city in Libya, nurse of sheep. Pause. Does this kind of remind you how God speaks to Abraham and say, hey, go to this place, you're going to establish this, you're going to be a father of many nations, like here's this promise. It's not identical. It's just the idea that a God is promising, go to this place, you're going to end up ruling. And in fact, it's contrary to everything evident in his own life in the story. Abraham's old, things aren't going his way. In fact, there's all sorts of problems along the way that doesn't seem like things are going to happen the way God promises. Wouldn't you know it? Eventually, his children, after they leave Exodus in Egypt, just so happen to rule with Joshua. The book of Joshua really has them conquer it and get the land. It's Judges that comes in and starts to change this stuff. And later, some of these books that say, you know what? They messed up and they didn't completely subdue it. And so there's a lot of scholars who write on this stuff. So continuing, send you to found us in Libya, nurse of sheep, just as if she addressed him using the Greek word for king, Basilius, you have come for a voice, etc., etc. But he answered, Lord, I came to you to ask you about my speech, but you talk of other matters, things impossible to do. You tell me to plant a colony in Libya. Where shall I get the power or strength of hand for it? Battus spoke thus. But as the god would not give him another oracle and kept answering as before, he departed while the priestess was still speaking and went away to Thera. That is the stammerer. So I think Battus means stammerer. That's what I was told. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share, just to point out, like, here are gods who are promising land. They promise kingship and genealogy and all of these things. We see this with Phrixus. I'll share one more thing. I did a video on this with Abraham, but this was a fun connection here. And I don't know. You see it? I'm sharing it now.
Yep.
Okay. So Philip Wagenbaum wrote a book called Argonauts of the Desert. And there was an article that was written by, I can't think of his name right now. My brain is a little bit fried. Anyway, he goes into Levi Strauss. A version of a myth is always derived from an existing adaptation. Originating most of the time from a different culture and language, a myth must always be analyzed in comparison to its variants within the same cultural area where contacts between populations are proven. And he's just giving you some stuff to say, hey, before I sound like a crazy guy comparing Phrixus and Isaac with the sacrifices that we see Abraham sacrificing him on the mountain and the promises of God and stuff. That is also happening in a Greek myth. So here's what it happens. This is the crucial Phrixus myth, if you will, in a shortened 10 steps. Athemist, king of Boeotia, married Nephele, a cloud goddess created in the image of Hera by Zeus. Athemis and Nephele had twin children, a son Phrixus, a daughter Helle. Athemis afterwards rejects Nephele and married Ino, another goddess, I think. Ino hated her stepchildren, Phrixus and Helle, so she plotted to have them killed by their own father. Ino bribed messengers who told King Athemis that the oracle at Delphi, speaking for the god Apollo, required the sacrifice of Phrixus on Mount Laphystian in order to end famine in Boeotia. So she's tricking her husband that she hates his children from the first wife, Nephele, and says, hey, look, go, here's some money probably, who knows what she bribed him with. Go and tell Athemis that Apollo said, sacrifice your children on a burnt offering. That's on a mountain. And it says, just as Athemis was about to sacrifice his son Phrixus, because he's an obedient person of God, Apollo, he goes to sacrifice Phrixus. Zeus, or Nephele in other myth versions, sent a golden winged ram to rescue Phrixus and Helle by flying away with them. Helle fell off the ram, hence the Hellespont, Helle's Sea. The ram brought Phrixus safely to Colchis, Georgia. In gratitude, Phrixus sacrificed to Zeus the golden ram that saved him and hung its golden fleece on an oak tree. Now, while it may seem quite inconsequential, probably the most important ingredient of this myth is that the prologue of the epic, it is the prologue of the epic of the Argonauts, who will come to Colchis, a land, years later to bring the famous golden fleece back to Greece. The significance of this will become apparent in the next post, where I begin to compare the structural context, blah, 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 blah. So we can recognize Abraham summons to the command and binds his son at the last moment. This is the Abraham myth. God sends an angel, interrupts the sacrifice. Abraham sees a ram. I mean, come on, guys. Stuck in a bush, and sacrifices the ram instead of his son. Now, it's not identical. There's an inversion here. But Neil Godfrey is the one who wrote this article based on Philip Wagenbaum's work. Here you have the divine command to sacrifice one's son, real in the cases of Isaac, where Yahweh really says sacrifice your son. In the other case, it's a trick, a lie. And of course, it's both children. The father's pious, unquestioning submission to the command, last minute of the human victim by a divinely sent ram. In both cases, they both have a ram, right? So a direct command to the father in the case of Isaac, a direct command to the sacrificial victim in the case of Phrixus, the fastening of the ram in a tree or bush before the sacrifice of the ram in the case of Isaac. So he sees the ram. The angel says, hey, dude, all right, we get it. You're faithful. You trust God. Don't kill your son. Sacrifice the ram. After the sacrifice of the ram in the case of Phrixus. So he gets saved. Then later, when he lands where the ram takes him, he sacrifices thanking Zeus for saving his life. None of these myths are identical, but there's enough elements here for me to think someone's stewing the same ingredients in the pot. And I know for a fact you can't get this much in common to not think someone's circulating a myth. And I'm seeing the Bible. I tend to think that the Bible would have borrowed from this older Argonautica myth, because this Argonautica myth is also seen in Homer, and Homer's 7th, 8th century BCE. And it looks like this myth even is older than Homer. It has deeper roots into it. So it's hard to say, because you also find in Eusebius an interesting thing. I'm going to stop here. You find in Eusebius this really old Phoenician god El, who sacrifices his only begotten son and then circumcises himself. So when I say that, like, Eusebius, in his preparation for the gospel, is talking about a source he has from a guy named Philo of Byblos. And this guy is actually talking about a source that goes back to a priest, a Phoenician priest in late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, Levant. And he's talking about a god named El who sacrifices his son, not a human named Abraham, a god named El who sacrifices his son named Yedud. It's Ieudded, something like that. You can find it in the source in Eusebius. And then he circumcises himself after he sacrifices his only begotten son. Eusebius literally calls him his only begotten son. Now he's trying to convince you that like these old myths, these old stories, they're not myths, by the way, Eusebius wants to tell you. They're real. These all point to Jesus. So he's trying to use the known myths of the world to say, these are all telling you about Jesus that's coming. It's just an interesting thing. I don't know if there's a combination of this Phoenician myth that I do think influenced the Bible, but then there's this strange adaptation of things that are happening with the ram and stuff. And several scholars have pointed out many things in Abraham and Moses look late.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Is there Greek influence on top of an ancient, I'm going to call it Semitic influence from the region here? I think so.
Yeah. Do you know, I'm going to have a conversation later tonight with an Islamic scholar. He studied the Islamic Quranic old manuscripts, and he works out of the University of Helsinki. He's from Morocco.
Oh, wow.
And it seems to be this is not it's very systematic. I think
Right.
almost every religion on earth is trying to backdate the scripture to look older. There is a
Right.
value of things look older than what it is, because you can work out prophecies. You can do so many different things with backdating a text. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I think humanity is able to come with similar analogies. We know that,
Yeah.
like Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace both came with the theory of evolution at the same time. The television was invented at two places at the same time. The pyramids, they've been built in different civilizations, very far from each other. So I think humanity, because we evolved to have the same brain, and we evolved pretty much under very similar conditions. So coming up with the same conclusions is not a far-fetched thing.
No.
However, I think there are elements of borrowing and revising and adding your spices and to your recipe. It's like almost like a recipe you inherit from your grandmother, and over generations somebody adds some bit of sage, a bit of rosemary, and eventually it becomes a little bit different than the original recipe, but it's still a casserole.
I'd even argue what original recipe, because that's what Claude Levi-Strauss is trying to say, that no myth we have is the original. Every single story that you ever find in any of these ancient texts have gone through some editorial redaction or some type of tweak or manipulation from its original. And we're never dealing with the original. And he also was making this argument to kind of help people who don't know the original languages to the materials, to say, just because you don't know the actual Hebrew or the actual Greek, and those tools can help you understand the material you're reading in its language better. But you can see Akkadian loanwords and strange stuff that goes back to earlier Mesopotamian myths, even Ugaritic myths with gods, or even like these strange creatures like Leviathan or Lotan, mythical creatures like Rahab, a water beast, and things that have kind of a strange mythical antecedent in Mesopotamia, with Marduk finding Tiamat or strange stuff like that. Like, you can see that. And even those myths, we know Marduk borrowed from earlier Sumerian and Babylonian myths. And then you go and like you keep tracing it back, and I can't imagine, oh, well, the oldest written accounts of Mesopotamia, those are all original to. No, they're borrowing from prehistory, pre-writing, that we have ideas and concepts from civilization, and the idea of chaos. From chaos, order starts to come, and civilization and kings. You'll notice, and even in the Kings list, people like Seth L. Sanders, who know this stuff, will point out the names of kings before, I can't remember the name of the king, But before a certain king, all of their names, they're myths. They're made up kings because every one of their names means something of chaos. So it's like that same thing where Adam means earth. And wouldn't you know, he actually is made from the very thing he is named. It's that strange, like the story is told in the name of the actual character. And you find this stuff. And I'm like, I love learning this. But it tells me, man, humans have been clever coming up with stories for a long time. And I'm exploring those areas, even ones that aren't the consensus pertaining to Greek connections to the Bible. This book right here is one that I highly recommend. The scholar died of cancer a few years ago. I don't know if you can see that. Homer's Odyssey in the Near East by Bruce Loudon. And he has some pretty profound statements he says at the beginning when he's trying to compare these two. One of them, he says, is, my study demonstrates the genres of myth that comprise the Odyssey are also extant in Near Eastern cultures, often in Gilgamesh, but most frequently in Old Testament myth. Why do commentators usually omit consideration of the substantial parallels between Homeric and Old Testament myth? Modern audiences may, even without realizing, project their beliefs onto how they read ancient texts. Given the long dominance of Christianity and Judaism in the West, a majority of modern Western audiences, whether consciously or unconsciously, may, on the basis of their faith, regard biblical and Homeric narratives as opposites, seeing the former as true or real, but the latter as false, unreal, or fictional. Intentionally or unintentionally, faith has erected a wall between the study of the two narrative traditions. I ask readers, therefore, to consider the parallels I adduce and the arguments proposed concerning them as objectively as possible. And he literally also says, I'm not going to go hunting it down, there is no closer parallels to the narratives we find in the Hebrew Bible in the way that they're constructed in the ones he's giving parallels to than the Homeric Odyssey and Iliad over to the Old Testament. These stories of these famous patriarchs, no other myths have closer parallels in how they are looking in the forms we have than between these two. It just becomes a problem because a lot of scholars are looking for Semitic roots, and they think because you're dealing with a lot of these stories from the Greeks are coming from like Proto-Indo-European language that evolves, and they think that this is completely separate, and these stories would have been completely separate from a lot of the stuff we find in the Bible, which has its Semitic root. But that's forgetting that people like Heracles, we call Hercules because of the Roman name, that guy was not original to Greek pantheon. He came in from Semitic background. Heracles is most likely a Greek or this figure, which is also Phoenician and Melkart. This guy comes in from probably Gilgamesh. So you can think Gilgamesh and this heroic semi-god strongman who fights a lion and stuff. This comes in from the Semitic backgrounds, and they just don't like when I try to say I think the Bible might actually be borrowing its myths. It has Semitic roots, but from the Greeks. There's all sorts of borrowing happening.
Yes, and there are elements of that for sure. We're going to wrap in the next 5 minutes because I'm very mindful, Derek. I know you're probably going to have a bite and something to drink before you have another live coming very soon. And maybe you want to tell people a little bit about what is your broadcast in a few hours?
We're talking about pretty much the older flood myths, way older than Noah. And Joshua Bowen and Megan Lewis are going to be joining me. Joshua Bowen has his PhD, Assyriologist. He knows the ancient languages of this material. He's mowed over them. We're constantly constructing new ideas for videos that we're doing. He's giving me one on Gilgamesh. We're going to be trying to give a documentary on the story of Gilgamesh in a way you can enjoy and learn. And maybe in that documentary, we can kind of point to some things that show up in Bible. I don't know. We'll see. But this one's going to be just how we know these myths are older and going all the way back to the Sumerian language that later Babylonian and Akkadian myths borrow their stories from. And gonna kind of slam the whole Noah thing.
Yeah.
Debunk this literally happening the way that we see it here. It's myth, it's mythology. And in fact, I think people who want this to be literal history, they're robbing the fun and the power of the story when they do that.
Yeah.
You got to have this happen this one time, and it's a
Yeah.
story. Anyway,
Plus, it's a scientific claim because it's an empirical claim. We know even from science now that
we know it's
it didn't
yeah.
happen. So that's like out of
You've
the
actually
question.
talked like many times on your show. Anyone who watches this channel for MythVision, subscribe. Hanny's my friend. I want to see him succeed because he's all about trying to educate the world and understand these things just like me. He's a seeker. He's wanting to know.
Much appreciated, Derek. Now, to
Yeah.
wrap this up, I want to explain to people why I was motivated to have this episode. Because what we're talking about might sound very theoretical. It sounds very, I was sitting in ivory towers, smoking cigars and thinking about. But the reality is, these promises have implications. And we're not going to talk politics today because we
No.
know there is a certain conflict happening in the Middle East. But
Yeah.
what we're talking about is having real implications where people are dying. Human beings are dying from both sides because of stupid stories like that. And because also the other side, which is the Muslim side, have also their own myths where it talks about the judgment day won't happen until a tree and a rock, trees and rocks will start speaking and speaking to Muslims, say, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. They believe that.
Right.
So, in a crazy world where people believe that God has given them a land and the other promised them that the things will start talking to tell them about Jews hiding behind them to kill. Where from here? Are we going to learn to listen and try to live peacefully and prosperously, or are we going to continue to live like apes?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think apes act better than we do, actually. So we should probably find a better word, right? Yes, I get your point though, that just nature can kind of be wild and do crazy things. But I seriously mean that. Like if we look at how apes act, they act better than what we're seeing happen right now. So I think at the end of the day, it would be amazing to see people look through these stories, have reverence for tradition, have reverence for your stories that have ancestral roots, but understand, this is not literally true. Fundamentalism, dogma, that this is actually the case and that you think in this literal sense on either side is going to create a problem. And this is what I'm trying to stamp out and what you're trying to stamp out. I don't want people to not be able to say they believe in something or they
Mm,
decide they want to have beliefs. That is not my goal. It is to defang fundamentalism ultimately. And the longer I'm studying this stuff, the more I'm learning, the less um I guess you'd see I'm toning it down against people having beliefs, period,
same
because
here.
there are categories of spiritual lives and things. People just want to be good humans.
Yeah.
They naturally want to have something that they think is beyond the grave, right?
Hmm.
I have nothing against people who have these, what I would call superstitions or hope, wishful thinkings, things like that. It's when what you believe impacts in such a negative way that you're seeing the chaos that we see and have seen with the endless wars in history that have occurred as well. And they also break down those walls that divide us, that create these different categories because of these deep rooted traditions and dogmas that we've told ourselves or we've been taught. And I
Hmm.
hope that more people will wake up and realize these are humans that constructed these things and that they're not literally the case. You want to glean some spiritual stuff, cool, go for it. I just, that I can only do what I can do though, Hanny, and that's try to help people see these things for what they are.
It's going to be difficult to change. I think the only way to get out of that and for people to remain religious, because I'm very much like you at the moment. This is exactly when I took 6 months off streaming and coming up with contents. I was reflecting and wondering, and exactly I've reached the same point. I want to come from a place of compassion of humanity and reduce suffering. Some
Yeah.
people are hardwired to believe. I think they might be psychologically or neurologically. Some people need to believe. Some people are in conditions where life is so horrible for them. Taking away that belief is might be inhuman. It's not a nice thing to do. You try to do it indirectly and let people go through their own journeys and
Yeah.
come up with their own conclusions in their own time. All
Exactly.
what you have to do is just point out what you think is reasonable, and people can draw the fact. But for now, if people want to believe in these stories, um, add that symbolism and saying that like, these are stories have been told to understand certain human endeavor, learn some lessons and draw some lessons, but they were not exactly like that. And if they were like that in the past, at least they might be frozen in the past, and we should not try to do them today. Today's world is a different world. So it pains me to see the obviously you're always going to get evil people who would try to do bad things, but I'm
Hmm.
looking at children from both sides, and it's like, what does that 6 months old deserve to have that reality, you know?
Right.
To me it's horrible, and it needs to stop, and it really
Yeah.
needs to stop.
Yeah. There's no matter how you flip the coin, there's a lot going on in so many ways that everybody suffers. And I think there's fundamentalism, dogma that plays a significant role in many cases that need to be, I hope people stop, grow up, believe something else, something peaceful, something that unites humanity and doesn't divide. And I'd love to see that. That's kind of what we're trying to do, is educate the world, but not coercively. Try to
Yeah.
get them to think their way out of some of these things. We all bleed red. We're all pink on the inside. We're all part of the same planet. Unite humanity in some way. And I don't know all the answers, Hanny. I mean, I know you think I do. No, but seriously, I really don't know
It's the same here. I don't
what
know. Yeah.
all the answers are. So
Yeah, we're gonna try. We're somewhat almost discovering it as we go. But I think humanity is, and I can understand that because we're animals. We are classified animals in biology. There are still the tendencies of being tribal.
yeah,
You see it in the football game. You're watching and the amount of people are not even watching the sport anymore. They're tormenting each other in the stadiums because it's about I'm red, you're blue, and the different
you
colors.
get what? Yeah. Yeah, I've seen them, plenty of it. I've been there and actually seen it in person. So yeah. Yeah.
Again, thank you so much, Constellation Pegasus, for being so generous. Do you want to maybe we'll make that the last comment? Let's comment on this. Um,
Sun
uh,
goes nova and destroys the earth. Wonder how Christianity will survive when humanity leaves for the stars, leaving Earth behind.
that's like if we that's actually let's end at this note. Let's
Yeah.
fast forward. Let's imagine another 50 years of humanity. We've discovered so much more. The average life is about 100 years now, as opposed to 80. So we've improved. We kind of gone to space and looking at different avenues of living in different areas. Do you think the myth is going to still be attached to humanity? Or are we going to grow at some point, or do you think it's hardwired in us that we will end up creating some new ones
Yep.
more suited to our new environments?
I cannot see that far into our evolution to know what we as humans, if we're able to do so successfully without catastrophes on Earth setting us back to Stone Age times, with all the advancements we have. Let's just say there's no hiccups like that. There's no almost massive extinction, level type stuff happening, and we keep going forward and we build these crafts that allow us to leave space and stuff. I am just throwing out a number, and I could be so wrong. Humans, I think, need how we talk about consciousness? I don't want to get
Mhm.
lost in this because this is a whole dude. We'll never stop. But I think part of experience is part of the brain, and it's part of the pattern seeking, pattern connecting of reality all at once and finding ways to make sense of it for us in our existence. Part of that is creating a story
Mhm.
naturally. Naturally, we are part of making up stories about our existence and how we experience and the way we relate to each other because we're a social creature. We even invent the narrative we're going to communicate to our loved ones in some degrees. We fictionalize every little thing we do in some way. If we really picked apart everything we said as we said it, we'd probably start realizing really quickly, whoa, I'm making shit up. A lot of stuff along the way I'm making up. And it's like we need a story to latch onto as we go. And so I'm hoping we take the best science we can without dogma and say this story will change as we learn more, but make it as close to the reality of existence as possible. The thing is some will say that's nihilistic, because once you look at things in that way, you're going to just start seeing what's the point. Well, maybe we craft it in a way that gives more flavor to the reality of the story we have about reality, to where we came, not from a guy who was crafted by clay, who God went, and in the earlier myths, by the way, it was sex, it was semen. So if you go to like El, or if you go to Enlil and Enki, or if you go into the gods like Canute and other deities in Osiris and stuff like that, they're actually, in some cases, doing the putting it in their mouth, or ejaculating in the earth to create humanity. That sounds a little bit like, let's not make that our story. Like we should probably not teach that as our story. We should probably come up with other ones. Okay. But you get my point. I think we're always going to want to have stories, Hanny.
So instead of saying His Holiness, we'll say his jizness.
Yes, right. His jizness. But I think it should be kind of like Santa Claus. Kids, I loved Christmas spirit. My parents played me so hard when I was a kid. We went to Cooperstown, New York. They had the local Santa that had a hut, knew who I was. I didn't know him. I went in and he says, Derek, what would you like for Christmas? And I was like, you know my name? Like, it was fiction and it was made up and they bullshitted me. And I loved it so much. And I'm so glad that I had those experiences. However, I turned 11, 12, 10, I can't remember, one of those years, getting to the transition of preteen. And they were like, meet Santa. Mom, Dad, here's Santa. It's like, oh, was you guys all along? Oh, you know what? And then I did it to my kids. I get on the roof Christmas Eve night and stomp, be like, Santa's on the roof. We did things like that. It's tradition. It's cool.
But like I was just thinking about it, like you'd go to a Superman movie or Thanos and the Avengers, and we will enjoy it. We will thoroughly enjoy it and get into it. But we get out and we know that these things are not. But there are some people who will go to those sort of those sort of convention where they dress up and they become the characters and they live it and they believe it in so much, even having debate forum where Thanos was right and whether he was, and they get it. And these are the religious people. They actually live the illusion, because storytelling, I think we evolved to be storytellers. Any wisdom is transferred via story. That's why we addicted to movies still. We go the movie now, we could take the popcorn and take the kids and it's movie time. And this is where
it's part of our survival.
I think so.
You ever watch the show Alone?
No, I don't think so.
I'll just tell you this, and maybe someone in the audience has. We're watching it right now. We're almost on season 7 or 8 or something. Me and Ryan. Right. And we watched this show Alone, where contestants enter to try and win $500,000. They've moved it up to $1 million now, and they have to survive and out-survive all the other contestants. Now it's at a point where if anyone survives 100 days, they get $1 million. They are in the Arctic, okay? They are left in a desolate place where they have bears and like ox bulls and like crazy stuff that they have to like survive. They have a phone they can call to say, I tap out, come save me. And a helicopter comes in and gets them like over hours, because I don't know where they're located from there. Point is you watch these people. They're desolate. They're alone. No one there with them. Watch their behaviors. Watch what they tell you. Listen how they say what they're missing, what they don't have, what they need. And they're making games up. They're finding ways to occupy their mind by creating, like they're trying to make up songs and they need to make a chair. They're trying to distract themselves from the insanity of
Mm-hmm.
loneliness and survival and the crap that they're in right now. And they're just crying. They're having mental breakdowns. It's insane. And so, of course, you can see how we are social creatures play a huge part of
Mm-hmm.
that. But like,
I mean, we were once
story,
thinking Castaway with Tom Hanks, with
yes, he
Wilson.
makes up the volleyball. He created a fictional person. And guess what? It helped him survive.
Yes.
There's some depth there. There's some depth there. So, yes, I do think wherever we go as we are, until we somehow physiologically evolved into something
Yeah.
completely different, I just don't think we're going to know how to break away from stories and even dreams. There's so much behind what that is that helps us survive, that people with our memories, we craft these stories. I'll have a dream. I'm like, dude, that was the craziest, nuttiest, absurd, unrealistic dream I've ever had, but it was cool, or something, it's like,
Yeah. But the
so
very funny thing, and we're gonna probably end up with this because this is we can talk forever because this has actually
yeah,
got very interesting.
yeah,
But the very funny thing is we have not sort of evolved to know the truth.
right.
Sometimes having knowledge of something that is delusional or not real or not reflective of reality has a survival advantage.
Right.
So you could, and the other way around, you being completely factual, it will not help you. Maybe being attached to a certain hope that we don't know what it is, and it's not even real,
Right.
might get you to hold on for those extra few hours, so help would come, and it
This
might
is
be
so good. This is so good. Two things. I'm reminded of apocalypticism. Really, what I mean is the idea of the end. So the cataclysmic prophecies and stuff we see, many scholars will tell you they failed. But to the people at the time, it helped them hold on. It helped them not give up. It helped them even if it was wrong. So psychologically, then another thing is one of my best friends overdosed, was unconscious, overdosed for 40 minutes. He's brain dead by the time they got to him. He died. His sister called me. Now, I'm no longer a believer at the time. I don't think this stuff is literally true. But she called me distraught, and she's such a sweetheart. And she said, Derek, I think the reason he died, and she was rationalizing, trying to make sense of how could her good brother die of this drug overdose. And she
mm,
says, I think he was too good for the world. So God took him and brought him to heaven. And that's why they took him. You know what I told her? Of course not. Because first of all, biologically, and then
well,
hell
you
no.
didn't say no,
I
of
said,
course not.
you bet your ass that's right. Of
Hmm.
course God took her. I don't even believe in God. Of course God took him to heaven, and he was too good for this world. And you're right. And I comforted her, even in
Yeah,
her what some might call delusion, right? In what helps her cope.
yeah.
I'm all for that. I'm not interested in trying to be an asshole just because I personally draw a conclusion. No. I've done that before. I've seen others do that. A lot of the new atheists have done that. And yes, I'd love to see the world start to see these things for that. But even the most rational are going to be irrational under trauma, under circumstances. Are going to help them pull through, and they're going to wish upon a star. They're going to hope for hope's sake that something isn't going to happen, because we're all human and this world is not always going to work in our favor. So,
Derek, I don't know what to say. Fantastic talking to you as ever. I mean, we need to do this more often because every time I speak with you, I don't see the cameras, and I'm just talking to you, and
yeah,
this is very interesting, and I think we ought to do it more often. So thank you so much for turning up to on Critical Faculty and share your pearls of wisdom.
thank you, Hanny. Appreciate it. Subscribe to Hanny. Help support him so he puts more eggs in that basket, right? So if more people are showing that they want to hear what he has to say, and the guest he brings on, he'll do that. So let's help him out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, people, for tuning in. And in few hours, another probably 10 hours from now, I'll be with a Muslim scholar speaking about the oldest manuscripts of the Quran, and do they actually match the current version we have?
Mm.
Chat to you later.